The September sun was setting, casting a soft golden glow over the quiet street. I should have felt excited. Tomorrow was my birthday, and Emily had been planning a celebration for weeks. She'd always been meticulous about making sure everything was perfect. But as I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. The curtains were drawn across the windows, blocking out the last bit of evening light. Emily never pulled the curtains at this time. She loved the way the sunset filled the living room with a warm glow. I hesitated before getting out of the car, an unsettling feeling creeping into my chest. Maybe it was just part of the party preparations. But still, as I stepped through the front door, the house was unusually quiet. I called out, "Hey, I'm home," but the only sound was the faint clatter of dishes coming from the kitchen. I moved toward the living room and stopped short when I saw her standing near the window, her back to me, phone pressed tightly to her ear. Her voice was low, barely audible. I froze, listening for a second. She was whispering, but I couldn't catch what she was saying. Then she turned, eyes wide, and hurriedly shoved the phone into her pocket before I could even register what had just happened. "Matt, you're home early," she said, her voice too bright, too forced. Her smile was thin, and she avoided my gaze as she walked over to give me a quick, almost mechanical kiss on the cheek. "Yeah, I finished up sooner than I thought." I tried to keep my tone light, but my gut told me something was wrong. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," she replied quickly, moving toward the kitchen. "Just getting ready for tomorrow. You know, lots of last-minute things to handle." Her words were rushed, and she still wasn't looking at me. My eyes drifted toward her pocket, where the phone was now hidden. My mind raced. Who had she been talking to? And why did she act so guilty? I shrugged it off, or at least I tried to. "All right, just don't wear yourself out. You've been working really hard." Emily nodded, flashing a tight smile. "It's fine, really. It's going to be great." But her voice was distant, like she wasn't really talking to me. She was talking at me. As I went upstairs to change, my thoughts wouldn't leave me alone. Emily had been distant for weeks now, always on her phone, staying out late, coming home with vague explanations. At first, I thought it was just stress. Maybe she was just overwhelmed with the party planning. But now I wasn't so sure. The unease gnawed at me, the doubts taking root in a way I couldn't ignore. Later that night, we sat in the living room, the TV flickering in the background. I glanced at Emily, sitting on the couch next to me but feeling a million miles away. She kept checking her phone, her fingers scrolling absent-mindedly, her eyes never really meeting mine. Every now and then, she'd tap out a message, the screen lighting up her face in the dim room. I could feel the distance between us growing, like a chasm that neither of us wanted to acknowledge. "Busy night?" I asked, forcing a casual tone. She looked up, barely hearing me. "Your phone," I said, trying to keep it light. "You've been glued to it all evening." "Oh, just some messages about tomorrow," she said quickly, her eyes darting back to the screen. Nothing important, but it felt important. It felt like she was hiding something from me. My stomach churned with doubt, but I swallowed it down, trying to tell myself I was overreacting. She was probably just stressed about the party. But the way she acted, the way her eyes wouldn't meet mine, the way she guarded that phone like it held her darkest secrets, made my heart pound with anxiety. As we got ready for bed, the air between us was thick with unspoken tension. I slid under the covers, watching as Emily climbed in beside me, turning her back almost immediately. Her phone was still in her hand, the screen lighting up one last time before she finally set it down on the nightstand. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions I didn't want to ask. Was there someone else? Had I missed something? I wanted to believe she was just tired, stressed from the preparations. But deep down I knew something was wrong. Something had changed between us. And for the first time in our marriage, I wasn't sure if I could trust her. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of freshly brewed coffee drifting from the kitchen. Normally, that scent would have brought a smile to my face, but today it barely registered. The unease from the night before hadn't left me. Instead, it had wrapped itself around my chest, tightening with each passing thought. Emily was already downstairs when I got up, her back turned to me as she worked at the stove. She looked normal. The same as any other morning, like nothing had happened, like the tension between us the night before had been a figment of my imagination. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to walk into that kitchen, wrap my arms around her, and pretend that everything was fine. But I couldn't shake the feeling that things were far from fine. "Morning," I said, forcing a smile as I stepped into the kitchen. Emily turned to face me, her expression bright and cheerful, but it felt wrong. "Morning. I made pancakes, your favorite." She gestured toward the plate on the counter, stacked high with blueberry pancakes. "My favorite." She was trying. That's what made it worse. "Thanks," I muttered, sitting down at the table. I picked up my fork, but the food tasted like cardboard in my mouth. My mind was elsewhere, trapped in a loop of suspicion and doubt. "So," Emily said, sliding into the chair across from me, "everything's set for tonight. James is coming over early to help with the decorations." At the mention of James, my grip tightened around the fork. I didn't want to feel this way about him. He was my friend. But lately, the way he and Emily interacted, it bothered me. It was subtle, but I noticed things. Little things. The way they stood close to each other during conversations, the way she'd laugh a little too hard at his jokes, the way his eyes lingered on her for just a second too long. Maybe it was nothing. But maybe it wasn't. "Right, James?" I said, my voice coming out more clipped than I'd intended. Emily looked up, a slight frown tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Is everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, of course. Just a lot on my mind." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She didn't press the issue, and part of me wished she had. Maybe if she asked the right questions, I'd spill everything. Maybe I'd confront her, ask her about the late nights, the phone calls, the distance that had settled between us like a heavy fog. But she didn't. Instead, she stood up, clearing the plates from the table as if nothing had changed. But everything had. As the day wore on, I couldn't stop thinking about it. About her. About James. I'd never been a jealous person, but lately, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something happening right under my nose, something I was too blind to see. Every time her phone buzzed, my heart skipped a beat. Every time she smiled at a text, a wave of nausea rolled through me. I went for a walk to clear my head, hoping that some fresh air might help me shake the paranoia that was gnawing at my brain. The crisp autumn air filled my lungs as I walked through the neighborhood, my mind racing with questions I didn't want to answer. Was I losing it? Was I just imagining things? Or was there something real behind my suspicions? By the time I returned home, the house was buzzing with activity. Emily had started setting up for the party, balloons and streamers draped across the walls, the table set with snacks and drinks. She moved around the room with a sense of purpose, her smile bright as she adjusted the decorations. She looked happy, carefree. James was there too. Of course he was. He was helping Emily hang the lights in the backyard, the two of them working together like a well-oiled machine. I stood in the doorway, watching them, my chest tightening with every laugh, every smile they exchanged. I wanted to join them, to be a part of the excitement, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was an outsider in my own home. "Hey, birthday boy," James called out when he noticed me standing there. He walked over, pulling me into a quick hug. "You ready for tonight?" I forced a grin, though my stomach churned. "Yeah, ready as I'll ever be." As the evening wore on, guests began to arrive, filling the house with laughter and chatter. I tried to enjoy myself. I really did. But every time I glanced at Emily and James, standing close together, talking in low voices, the knot in my stomach grew tighter. I couldn't focus on anything else. The party, the laughter, the warmth of our friends, it all faded into the background, overshadowed by the gnawing feeling of betrayal that I couldn't shake. At one point, I saw Emily slip out of the room, her phone in hand. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched her go. I waited a few minutes, then followed her. She was standing in the hallway, her back to me, phone pressed to her ear again. She was whispering, just like she had the night before. I stepped closer, my pulse racing. Her voice was soft, too low for me to hear clearly, but I caught a few words. "I know, just be careful tonight." A wave of nausea hit me and I froze in place. I couldn't hear the rest of the conversation, but I didn't need to. I knew. I turned and walked back to the party, my heart pounding in my ears, the world spinning around me. I needed to confront her. But not yet. Not here. I couldn't ruin the party in front of all our friends. So I plastered on a smile and pretended that everything was fine, all the while knowing that my life was falling apart right in front of me. The party was in full swing by the time the clock struck 9. Laughter and chatter filled the house, glasses clinked, and everyone seemed to be having a great time. Everyone except me. I couldn't stop watching Emily. Every move she made, every smile she flashed at someone else, especially James, sent a sharp pain twisting through my chest. It felt like I was watching her from behind a glass wall, separate and distant, while she carried on as if everything was fine. James was never far from her. They moved through the room together, laughing, joking with our friends, standing too close for comfort. Every time I tried to engage with them, it felt forced, like I didn't belong in their little world. I kept telling myself that I was imagining things, that I was overreacting. But then I saw it. The way James' hand lingered on the small of her back for just a second too long as they laughed at something. It was subtle, probably something no one else noticed, but I did. My stomach churned, bile rising in my throat. I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped outside, the cool night air hitting me like a slap to the face. I needed a minute to clear my head, to calm down. I leaned against the railing of the porch, taking deep breaths, but it wasn't working. The more I thought about it, the worse it got. The doubts, the suspicions, they were all crashing down on me, suffocating me. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring out at the dark street, trying to get a grip on myself. But when I turned back toward the house, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Through the kitchen window, I saw Emily and James standing together, alone. Everyone else was in the living room, and they were hidden from view, just the two of them, talking quietly. James was standing too close. Way too close. And then he reached for her. I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs. His hand brushed her arm, lingering there, and she didn't pull away. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she smiled. A soft, private smile meant only for him. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Everything I'd been trying to push down for weeks suddenly exploded to the surface, and in that moment, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't just my imagination. This wasn't paranoia. This was betrayal. I stormed back inside, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't care if it was in front of everyone. I didn't care if I ruined the party. I needed answers. Emily! I shouted, my voice louder than I intended. Conversations stopped, heads turned. Everyone stared at me, but I didn't care. All I could see was her face, wide-eyed and frozen as I marched toward her. Matt, what's wrong? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. But I could see the fear in her eyes. She knew. She knew exactly what was wrong. What's going on? I demanded, my voice shaking with anger. I pointed to James, who stood there, silent and pale. What's going on between you two? The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop. Emily's face flushed, her eyes darting around as if she was searching for an escape. James took a step back, raising his hands as if to ward off what was coming. Matt, it's not what you think, Emily said quickly, her voice desperate. Not what I think? I snapped, my voice rising. Then tell me what it is. Because from where I'm standing, it sure as hell looks like something's going on between you and James. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. I could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on us, the tension in the room growing unbearable. James finally spoke, his voice shaky. Matt man, we're just friends. That's all. I glared at him, my fists clenched at my sides. Friends? Is that why you've been sneaking around with my wife? Is that why you've been whispering behind my back? Matt, please, Emily whispered, stepping toward me. It's not like that. I swear. I stepped back, shaking my head. I couldn't believe this was happening. I couldn't believe that the woman I loved, the woman I trusted with my life, had betrayed me like this. Tell me the truth, Emily, I said, my voice low and dangerous. I deserve that much. After everything we've been through, you owe me the truth. She hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. But before she could say anything, her phone buzzed. The sound cut through the silence like a knife. She glanced down, and that's when I saw it, the look of pure panic on her face as she reached for her phone, trying to silence it. I grabbed her wrist before she could answer. "Who is it?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Who the hell are you talking to?" She pulled her hand back, her eyes wide with fear. "Matt, please." But I'd had enough. Without thinking, I yanked the phone from her hand, my heart pounding in my ears as I looked at the screen. And there it was, a message from him. "I'm waiting for you. Don't take too long." My blood turned to ice. I looked up at Emily, who was now crying, her face pale. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. I knew. And in that moment, everything shattered. The party was over. Most of the guests had left in a flurry of awkward goodbyes and sideways glances, leaving behind an unbearable silence. Emily stood in the center of the living room, her face streaked with tears, while I stood across from her, holding her phone in my hand. The words on the screen glared at me, confirming everything I'd been dreading. I tossed the phone onto the couch, my chest tight with rage and heartbreak. "Who is he, Emily? Tell me the truth." Her hands trembled as she wiped her eyes, but she couldn't look at me. "Matt, please, it's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I snapped, my voice raw with emotion. "I'm standing here with proof. Who is this guy? How long has this been going on?" She let out a shaky breath, her voice barely audible. It's been a few months." "A few months?" My mind reeled. 4 months, she'd been sneaking around behind my back, lying to me, pretending that everything was fine while she was with someone else. I couldn't breathe. The walls seemed to close in around me, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on my chest like a vice. I turned away from her, running my hands through my hair, trying to gather my thoughts. I needed to understand. "Why, Emily?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why did you do this?" She hesitated for a moment, then took a deep, shuddering breath. I felt alone. "You were always working, always traveling. It was like you weren't even here anymore. I needed someone to talk to, someone who made me feel seen." I spun around, my anger flaring. "So you found someone else? You just gave up on us? We've been through so much together, and this is how you repay me." Her face crumpled, and she sobbed into her hands. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't want to hurt me?" I could barely contain my fury. "You've destroyed everything, Emily. Our life, our marriage, everything." For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of her sobs filling the room. I felt like I was drowning, caught in a whirlpool of rage and heartbreak, with no way out. Then, something shifted in her expression. She wiped her tears, her face hardening as if she had made some sort of decision. When she spoke again, her voice was low, almost cold. "I don't want this to get any worse than it already is." I frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" She met my gaze, her eyes no longer pleading but calculating. "We can figure this out like adults. We don't need to drag this out, make it messy. If we're going to end this, let's end it cleanly." I stared at her, not fully understanding. "What are you saying?" Emily took a step forward, her voice soft but firm. "I think it's best if we part ways. I want what's fair." "Fair?" I repeated, incredulously. "You've been cheating on me, and you're talking about fairness?" She sighed, a tired look crossing her face. "Matt, I've put as much into this life as you have. The house, the savings, everything, it belongs to both of us. I'm not leaving with nothing." My blood ran cold as the realization hit me. She wasn't just talking about ending our marriage, she was talking about taking everything we'd built together. I stared at her in disbelief, the woman I thought I knew suddenly unrecognizable. "You're kidding, right?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. She shook her head. "No, I'm not. I've spoken to a lawyer. I'm entitled to half of everything." The room spun and I felt like I was going to be sick. "You planned this, didn't you? This whole time, You've been planning to leave me and take everything." She didn't respond, but the look on her face said it all. I couldn't believe it. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial. She was going to take me for everything I had. I took a step back, shaking my head. "You're unbelievable. Matt, this doesn't have to be ugly," she said, her tone softening. "We can work this out without tearing each other apart." I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. "You've already torn us apart, Emily. There's nothing left." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was thick with the weight of everything that had been said, everything that hadn't. I felt the rage bubbling inside me, threatening to boil over, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't let her win. Not like this. "You want out?" I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Fine. But don't think for a second that I'm going to roll over and let you take everything from me." Her eyes flickered, a hint of uncertainty creeping into her expression. She hadn't expected me to fight back. "I'll talk to my lawyer," I said coldly, moving toward the door. "But don't think for a second that this is over." I left her standing there, alone in the house we once called home. The place that had once been filled with love and laughter was now just a battleground. And the war was only beginning. The following days passed in a blur of anger and confusion. Every time I replayed that conversation with Emily in my mind, it felt like I was being punched in the gut all over again. I couldn't believe that the woman I had loved and trusted for so long had not only betrayed me emotionally but was now trying to destroy everything we had built together. I stayed at Mark's place for a few nights. He was my best friend, and he didn't ask too many questions. He just gave me space, knowing I needed time to process everything. But even there, away from the house, away from her, I couldn't escape the weight of it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, cold, calculating, ready to rip my life apart for her own gain. I knew I had to fight back. I couldn't let her take everything from me. But every time I thought about the legal battle that was looming ahead, I felt sick. Lawyers, courtrooms, dividing assets. It all felt so dirty. This wasn't how our story was supposed to end. But then again, I never thought our story would end at all. By the end of the week, I'd had enough. I couldn't hide from this forever. I needed to confront her, to figure out how we were going to move forward, if that was even possible. When I pulled into the driveway, the house felt different. Cold, unfamiliar. I hesitated at the door, not sure what to expect when I walked in. But I had to do this. I stepped inside, and there she was, Emily, sitting at the kitchen table, her phone in hand, looking as calm as ever. When she saw me, she didn't seem surprised. If anything, she looked ready. "We need to talk," I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. She set down her phone and looked up at me, her face expressionless. "I've already started talking to my lawyer." Her words hit me like a slap, but I refused to let her see how much it hurt. "I'm not going to let you take everything from me, Emily. You need to understand that." She sighed, standing up and crossing her arms over her chest. "I'm not taking everything. I'm taking what's mine." "What's yours?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What's yours, Emily? We built this life together. I've worked my ass off for years to provide for us, and now you want to walk away with half?" "I deserve half," she said coldly. "I've given just as much to this life as you have. And I'm not leaving empty-handed." I felt a surge of anger rising in my chest. "You're leaving because you've been screwing around behind my back for months. And now you want to take what I've worked for?" She didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled, a small, bitter smile that chilled me to the core. "You were never here, Matt. You were always off working, always too busy. I was lonely. I needed more than you could give me. So this is my fault?" I spat, incredulous. "You cheated, Emily. You destroyed our marriage, not me." Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw the full extent of her cold, calculating nature. "Maybe I did. But now, I'm going to make sure I get what I deserve. I've spoken to my lawyer, and I'm entitled to half of everything, just like you are. So you can fight me if you want, but it's not going to change anything." My hands clenched into fists at my sides. I had never felt so much anger, so much betrayal in my life. But I knew she was right. Legally, she was entitled to half. And no matter how much I hated it, no matter how much it tore me apart, there was nothing I could do to stop her from taking what she wanted. "I'll fight you," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I'll fight you for everything." She shrugged, her face calm and composed. "Do what you need to do." I stared at her, unable to comprehend how this woman, the one I had loved for so many years, could have turned into someone I didn't even recognize. I felt the last bit of hope drain from my body. This was it. The end of everything we had built. And she didn't even care. Before I could say anything else, her phone buzzed again. I glanced down and saw the name flash on the screen. Her lover. The one who had destroyed our marriage. The one she had chosen over me. "That's him, isn't it?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. She looked at the phone, then back at me. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt cross her face. But then it was gone, replaced by the same cold indifference. "It doesn't matter," she said quietly. "None of this matters anymore." I couldn't take it. I turned and walked out of the house, slamming the door behind me. I felt like I was suffocating, like the weight of everything was crushing me from the inside out. She had taken everything, my trust, my love, my future, and now she was going to take what was left of my life, too. But as I drove away, something shifted inside me. I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to let her take everything without a fight. I didn't care what it took, lawyers, court battles, whatever. I was going to protect what was mine. She had already taken enough from me. Now, it was time for me to take something back. The days following that last confrontation with Emily were some of the darkest of my life. The realization that she had been plotting not just to leave me, but to take everything, gnawed at me constantly. I didn't know how I was going to survive this fight, mentally, emotionally, or financially, but I knew I wasn't going to let her win. I met with my lawyer, laying everything out on the table. The betrayal, the lies, the way she had been secretly preparing to take half of our assets. I was ready to fight for what was mine, but even my lawyer admitted that without concrete evidence of her infidelity or her deceitful plans, the court might still side with her. As much as I hated to admit it, I was vulnerable. But then, out of nowhere, I got a message that would change everything. It was Mark, my best friend, who had stuck by me through this entire mess. He sent me a text late one night with a simple message: "You need to see this?" Attached were several photos and videos. My stomach dropped as I clicked on the first file, my heart pounding in my chest. The images that filled my screen made my blood boil. There she was, Emily with him. They were in various places, restaurants, bars, even what appeared to be a hotel room. Some photos were innocent enough at first glance, but the videos? They showed everything. Emily and her lover, caught in the act, oblivious to the world around them. There was no denying it now. This wasn't just speculation or suspicion, this was hard, undeniable proof. I felt a wave of emotions crash over me: anger, betrayal, relief. I finally had what I needed. With this evidence, there was no way she could lie her way out of it anymore. I immediately forwarded everything to my lawyer. A few days later, we found ourselves sitting in the courtroom. Emily sat on the other side, looking confident, her lawyer by her side. She still believed she had the upper hand, that she could walk away with half of everything I'd worked for. But she didn't know what I had. As the proceedings began, both lawyers made their cases. Emily's lawyer painted a picture of a woman neglected by her husband, forced to fend for herself emotionally and financially. They argued that she deserved her fair share of our life together. But then my lawyer stood up, his face calm and composed. He introduced the photos and videos, laying them out for the court to see. I watched as the color drained from Emily's face. She had no idea this was coming. The smug confidence she had worn since the start of this whole ordeal crumbled in an instant. "This evidence," my lawyer said, "clearly shows that Mrs. Harris has not only been unfaithful to her husband, but that her infidelity has been ongoing for several months. This isn't a case of a marriage falling apart due to neglect. This is a case of calculated deception, where one party not only betrayed their spouse emotionally but also plotted to take half of their assets under false pretenses." The courtroom was silent. I could see Emily's lawyer scrambling, whispering urgently to her, but it was too late. The damage was done. The judge reviewed the evidence carefully, his expression unreadable. For what felt like an eternity, we sat there in silence, waiting for his decision. Finally he spoke. Based on the evidence provided, it is clear that the actions of Mrs. Harris were not in good faith. Her infidelity, combined with her attempt to take a significant portion of the shared assets, demonstrates a lack of integrity in her claims. I rule in favor of Mr. Harris. The division of assets will be reconsidered, with the majority awarded to him. A wave of relief crashed over me, but it was mixed with a deep sadness. I had one, but at what cost? My marriage was over. The woman I had once loved was now a stranger, and I was walking away with everything except the life we had built together. Emily sat there in shock, her face pale, her hands trembling. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered all the lies, the betrayal, the way she had tried to take everything from me without a second thought. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. As I walked out of the courtroom, my lawyer shook my hand, congratulating me on the victory. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the end of a war I never wanted to fight in the first place. Mark was waiting for me outside. He gave me a nod, his eyes filled with sympathy. You did it, man. You fought back. I nodded, the weight of everything finally starting to lift. I couldn't have done it without you, I said, thinking of the evidence he had sent me. Those photos, they changed everything. He smiled, patting me on the back. I told you I had your back. We walked out into the fresh air, the world feeling a little brighter now that the battle was over. But as I stood there, looking out at the city around me, I realized that this was just the beginning of something new. I had won the fight, but now I had to figure out how to rebuild my life from the ashes. One thing was for sure, Emily had taken enough from me. She wasn't going to take any more. I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you for watching my videos, sharing them, and supporting me along the way. Your views, comments, and likes are the driving force behind my passion to create captivating and unexpected stories. Every tale I share is more than just a plot. It's a journey of emotions, lessons, and reflections that we experience together. Your engagement brings life and soul to this channel. Thank you for sticking with me until the very end of each video because the finale of every story is where the real impact lies. I promise to continue delivering twists and turns that surprise, inspire, and resonate with your hearts.